Hello, BookTube. It's time for an essay. I've been a bit remiss over the last couple of days, but I've been a little under the weather. I've had a bad cough, and every time I tried to talk, I went into coughing fits. It seems to have dissipated quite a bit. I just have the remnants of a very sore throat and allergy headache. I don't think it's anything else, but 'cause I haven't got any other symptoms other than those, really. It's just been kind of difficult to do videos, obviously. But I'm here to do an essay. I promised on Friday that I'd go back to more book collecting type essays, and we're going to do Claude A. Prance's essay or an essay from The Laughing Philosopher, a further miscellany on books, booksellers, and book collecting. It was published in 1976 by Villers Publications, London. And Prance himself was born, I forget the exact date now, but it was in the early part of the 20th century. He worked most of his life in banking. He did serve in the Second World War. And as we found from an essay on the earlier volume called from Peppercorn Papers, that he was retiring in the 60s on an island in the Mediterranean, and he was bemoaning not having his book collection with him because it hadn't sort of arrived yet. It was in storage. Later, at some point, he traveled a bit, and him and his wife settled finally in Australia. He died just in the early 21st century, about 2001, 2002, and the National Library of Australia purchased some of his books. He had about 15,000, I think, volumes at that time, and he had some unique volumes of Charles Lamb, even John Clare, as well as Swinburne and a few others. I don't know what happened to the rest of his library. I'd like to actually see. It'd be nice to see a catalog of his library if there ever was a sale catalog for that. But speaking of catalogs, that's what the essay is in this volume, and I've lost my place now. Let's see if I can find it. Uh, well, actually, no. It's on being parted from one's books. I think it was in this volume. Actually, I'm seeing the here it is. Book catalogs. Yeah, it's a shortish essay, but he starts out with three quotations as usual in this volume. I do not know any reading more easy, more fascinating, and more delightful than that of a catalogue. Anatole France, The Crime of Sylvester Bonnard. Often and often have we cut open a new catalogue of old books with all the fervour and ivory folder of a first love, and have put crosses against dozens of volumes in the list, out of the pure imagination of buying them, the possibility being out of the question. Leigh Hunt, respective review or companion to the lovers of old books. Many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven. The essay starts proper here. To the book collector, there is no more pleasant reading than that provided by book catalogues, and not only booksellers' catalogues, for although they are the cornerstone and cream of their class, the genus is much wider. It includes exhibition catalogues, publishers' lists, library catalogues, and book lists, such as those issued by the National Book League. As a small boy who no doubt had the bibliophilic bug developing in his blood, I procured lists of volumes in the Everyman series and World Classics series, and carefully ticked the books I already had, very few, and marked with a cross those I should like to have, very many. When a little later I obtained a number of publishers' lists and similarly mutilated them, it was, of course, inevitable that booksellers' catalogues would follow, and they still continued to reach me in their due season, usually avoiding the summer months. how welcome they are, especially the general ones, which in their variety of content somewhat resemble those booksellers' shops, which deliberately avoid to close an attempt at classification. The very confusion raises hopes in the seeker's mind that some bargain looks hidden among the miscellany. The book collector avidly pores over these compilations at the first available opportunity, for many a bargain has been lost by delay. Sometimes he writes by return of post, sometimes by he telegraphs. If possible, he hastens to the shop itself for long wanted volume books of no tardiness. Some of us, even though we have outgrown most of our childhood habits, still mark our catalogues with a big cross for those books we want, a tick for those we already have, and perhaps a different mark for those we have but in a different edition from that in the catalogue. Then we reread them to make sure that we haven't missed anything. Some of us keep a record of the prices of those volumes we want but fail to get, or of those we already have. Finally, we discard a few catalogues, but carefully preserve others for future reference. For many contain bibliographical detail of value. In years to come, we go back to them and then lament the bargains that we failed to get, perhaps for lack of money, procrastination, or because we were not then interested in that kind of book. Duplicated catalogues are not popular with us, at least we do not preserve them. But many from the larger antiquarian booksellers and the book auctions are things of beauty and continual pleasure. I have catalogues issued by Robinson of Pall Mall in 1948 and 1950, containing several hundred items in which every book is attractively illustrated. True, I could not afford to buy the Caxton at £15,000, which is fully described, but the pleasure of imagination is great. Valuable information is often gained from the catalogues devoted to books from a particularly author's or collector's library, for a man is known by his books. I read, therefore, with great interest, the sale catalogues I have of the libraries of Andrew Lang, J. Dykes Campbell, Edmund Goss Plays, Holbrook Jackson, and A.L. Humphreys. Sotheby's catalogues are, of course, famous, and I value much those of the Chester Beatty, Dyson Parents, and Abbey sales. Catalogues of the sales of A. Edward Newton's catalogues and those of J. A. Spoor make pleasing reading and are excellent examples of book production. A most attractive one I have is that of Harry B. Smith, the American composer and book collector, and author of A Sentimental Library, in which he describes his association copies. If one does not possess sale catalogues of libraries of eminent persons, then one is grateful to Dr. A. N. L. Munby for his series of reprints he has edited in recent years, particularly as he often reproduces marked and priced copies. Austin Dobson based one of his most attractive essays, A Day at Strawberry Hill, largely on the sale catalogue of 1842, although he had his unrivaled knowledge of Horace Walpole to help him. I reread the essay with even greater pleasure now I possess a copy of the Strawberry Hill catalogue. A fascinating catalogue to collectors of the period is Elkin Matthews' 19th Century Literature, 1930, with an introduction by Edmund Blundin. I have also Tregatsky's catalogue of 1927 of some of the rare works of Charles Lamb. It is bound and has a bookplate of Vincent Escher. Over a number of years, I have preserved many catalogues of books on bibliography, and they now form an interesting record. Particularly pleasing, too, are those which illustrate and describe, often in great detail, illuminated manuscripts offered for sale. They form a partial substitute for the impossible task of possessing or viewing the manuscripts themselves. Booksellers' catalogues are the highlight of the collector's reading among catalogues, probably because there is always the hope, however faint, that he might acquire some of the volumes himself. However, other types can be nearly as attractive. Exhibition catalogues often record unique collections, usually brought together only for a short time. John Hayward's great poetry catalogue is a case in point. Others are printing in the mind of man. Various British Museum catalogues and those issued by the National Book League. Among these, that devoted to Walter de la Mare in 1956 was virtually a bibliography. Other author catalogues of value are those of the John Drinkwater exhibition, issued in 1962 by the Times Bookshop. The Bernard Shaw catalogue in 1946, issued on his 90th birthday, and that of John Clare exhibition in Northampton in 1964. One seldom seen now is the issue of Bumpus in 1934 to illustrate new paths in book collecting. Even the Sherlock Holmes exhibition of 1951 had a catalogue. Publishers' catalogues can be beautiful as well as interesting. For example, those produced by the Nonsuch Press and by Thomas Mosher. It is pleasant, too, to read J.M. Dent's lists issued earlier this century, which preserve a record of the attractive books which he published, while the Oxford University Press catalogue is famous. A catalogue issued in the 1920s by T. Fisher Unwin in commemoration of their first novel library makes interesting reading today, apart from the quaint photographs of famous and forgotten novelists. In recent years, the Private Libraries Association has issued its attractive annual list of private press books for us to browse over. Publishers' lists, which are preserved at the end of old volumes, sometimes provide useful and curious information. I once used a 16-page list dated 1824 to help identify contributors to the Old London magazine. It was included by the magazine's publishers, Taylor and Hesse, at the end of their edition of De Quincey's novel Waldemar, and included books by authors who were later found to have written also for the magazine. Of library catalogues there is, of course, no end. Almost all are interesting and some are entirely fascinating, but they tend to run to many volumes and are often expensive and difficult to obtain. I imagine few private collectors possess the British Museum catalogue of printed books, but among others of more modern scope, I have enjoyed those that issued by the National Book League on its collection of books about books, and the catalogue of Elena issued by the Charles Lamb Society. Since we have traveled away from the relatively small booksellers' catalogues to larger bound volumes, book prices current, and book auction records should not be forgotten. After all, it is not Lowndes' bibliographer's manual of a sort of book catalogue. A Cambridge Bibliography of English Literature is certainly a massive book list. We are short of shelf space. We are short of reading time. In fact, we have too many books already, or so our relations tell us. Yet we still go on reading catalogues avidly and marking coveted items. Each of our books has been acquired separately, and each has its memories. It is true that books brought from a catalogue do not have quite the same bouquet as those stumbled on unexpectedly at a bookstall and devoured standing, obviously, into sunshine and rain. But catalogues supplement field activities, and sometimes the book lover has no choice but to collect by post. Perhaps in the end, the most satisfying catalogue to read is that of our own collection, for we can appreciate it more than anyone else by the memories it evokes, and we are in no danger of buying books from it. Yet, who knows what may happen? For Burton related the lamentable case of a book collector obliged to sell his books, but who, when we sale by auction took place, was suspected of bidding himself under an assumed name for volumes he could not bear to part with. So there ends book catalogs. I don't think there's very many anymore. I bought a book a year or so ago, I think it was, and it was a young publisher. I need to find that because it was a young bookseller, and his prices were a little higher than most, but he included a nice little catalog. It was very short. It was like 10 pages long, but it brought back the memories. Like Prance was saying, though, you go through and you go, oh yeah, I like that, and then you reread it again. And I used to do that a lot. I used to have catalogs coming out of my ears at times, but that's we're talking 30 years ago. And just now, I don't think hardly any booksellers print catalogs anymore. And looking at sort of printed lists online, it's not the same. It's you get this catalog in the post, and you just sort of pour over it. And again, like he says, I did that too. You tick off stuff that you have with the tick mark, and you put an X. Oh, I want that. I want that. I want that. And if you're lucky, you're able to buy one or two, maybe at best. But if anybody does know booksellers that still issue catalogs, please let me know in the comments, because I would love to get a few catalogs every once in a while. It'd be really nice to see a printed catalog again. But anyway, there ends my essay for today. It didn't go too bad. My throat is throbbing, but at least I haven't coughed yet today. So hopefully I'll be back to normal over the next few days. Anyway, take care, BookTube. Bye.